effective immediately. Your position has been eliminated as part of structural optimization.
Understood. Just remember, every system reacts to how it's shut down. Make sure you know which switch you just flipped.
The metal ID card lay flat on the glass table, catching the light like a mirror that refused to blink. My name, Landon Reese, was etched into it, letters clean and cold, across the table. The reflection wavered on a row of polished shoes and motionless hands. No one spoke. The silence inside the conference room of Orion Defense Systems was the kind that didn't wait for permission, it simply took over. At 9:40 a.m., the new CEO, Miles Hendricks, leaned forward with the confidence of a man who'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror. "Effective immediately," he said, voice trimmed to perfection. "Your position has been eliminated as part of structural optimization." Structural optimization, an elegant way to say you're obsolete. Around him, 12 members of the technical board stared at their notes, pretending to read what wasn't there. If you've ever been in a room like that, you know the feeling, the air heavy, time standing still. Tell me, where are you watching from right now? Tap subscribe and stay close, because what happened next at Orion Defense Systems changed everything. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I set my pen down beside the ID card and said, evenly, "Understood." My voice didn't tremble. It was almost mechanical, as if the system itself had spoken through me. Miles smiled a thin, managerial smile, the kind they teach in leadership seminars when they talk about decisive empathy. He slid a white envelope across the table. "HR will handle your exit by noon." When I stood, my chair gave a small metallic groan, the only sound that dared to exist. My eyes moved across the room, faces I'd built this company beside for 18 years, and not one of them met mine. I walked out without looking back, footsteps soft against the carpet that once led to every defense contract we'd ever secured. Outside the boardroom, a wall plaque caught my eye. Employee Excellence 2010, Landon Reese. My name was gone now, replaced by a polished plate that read Innovation Department. I almost laughed. Innovation, apparently the polite word for amnesia. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the steel panel, older, steadier, unrecognizable to them but not to myself. Because this moment, this exact time and date, wasn't an accident. It had been programmed months ago into Aegis Core, the system that kept Orion's production heartbeat steady. If my credentials were ever revoked under hostile conditions, it would respond, quietly, systematically. Miles thought he'd ended something at 9:40 a.m. He had no idea he'd just started it. The elevator doors closed with a hiss, sealing me inside a box of brushed steel in quiet humiliation. My hand still held the metal ID card, the edges biting faintly against my skin. The logo of Orion Defense Systems gleamed in the overhead light, a company I had once rescued, now cutting me loose like a loose wire. As the floor numbers blinked downward, the air felt heavier, thicker, as if gravity itself was mourning a secret I couldn't yet say aloud. 15 years earlier, I'd stood in a very different room, same building, different time. The air had been charged with possibility, not politics. Back then, Orion was collapsing under its own complexity, broken networks, delayed production lines, defense contracts slipping away. They brought me in as a consultant, a stopgap, the man who could stabilize what their executives had already doomed. I didn't just stabilize it, I built Aegis Core, the system that kept every weapon component, supply chain, and security feed running in perfect synchronization. I remember the applause that day when it first launched, engineers clapping, someone shouting, "He did it." It felt like purpose back then. The elevator chimed as it passed each floor, pulling me back to the present. The reflection on the metal walls caught my face, older now, sharper, marked by years of quiet endurance. I looked like a man who had been edited out of his own invention. The irony was almost comforting. I leaned against the cold rail and let the hum of machinery fill the silence. Back then, they called me a national asset. Now, I'm an aging liability. The line floated through my mind like a bad advertisement. The truth was simpler. Orion had grown too big to remember who wired its veins. They wanted innovation, not history, new faces, not fingerprints. As the elevator slowed, my thumb traced the engraved serial number on my ID badge. Every badge carried a hidden access token, one I had personally written into the firmware. Miles Hendricks, for all his polished ambition, would never know what that meant, because when I built Aegis Core, I didn't install it inside Orion's central servers. I had seen too many shifting chairs, too many executives come and go with promises of shared vision. So I built it on a private server cluster, registered quietly under my own LLC, buried beneath routine manufacturing metadata. The company used it every day without realizing they never truly owned it. The elevator bell chimed again. The doors opened to the ground floor. The light was colder down here, filtered through tinted glass and corporate design. I slipped the badge into my coat pocket and stepped into the lobby. To anyone watching, I must have looked calm, maybe even peaceful. But under that stillness, something was already moving, an algorithm stirring awake, tracing the pulse of a system that still carried my signature. They thought they'd fired a man. What they'd actually fired was the one who built their heartbeat. By the end of the week, Miles Hendricks unveiled what he called the Reformation Team. They walked into the engineering floor like a designer ad turtlenecks, wireless earbuds, and too much confidence for people who still needed visitor badges. They spoke in a new dialect of corporate fashion, modular synergy, AI-based iteration, dynamic data autonomy. Every phrase sounded like a PowerPoint slide that had never met a circuit board. Miles, of course, adored them. To him, they were the future. To me, they were a beta test wearing expensive shoes. Among them was Evan Rowe, 28, hair slicked to perfection, voice full of that caffeinated certainty only youth can afford. He introduced himself as an AI architect. When I asked what that meant, he grinned. It's like being a systems designer but sexier. I didn't laugh. He didn't notice. Miles assigned him to modernize legacy infrastructure, which apparently meant dismantling the backbone I'd spent years refining. My new title arrived the next morning via email consultant, Tier B, no department, no team. My desk moved to the far corner near the coffee machine, a liminal space where forgotten memos went to die. Every morning, I sat with the scent of burnt espresso and overheard the Reformation Team brainstorming slogans louder than solutions. Once in a while, someone would glance my way, unsure whether to nod or ignore me. I didn't blame them. This was how erasure sounded: quiet, polite, procedural. Sometimes, when the floor emptied after hours, I'd catch myself staring at the same wall I once leaned against 15 years ago, when junior engineers lined up asking for help. That corner used to be our war room, where we debugged crisis after crisis, laughing through exhaustion as the building's night lights hummed overhead. I'd kept the company alive from that spot. Now I occupied it like an artifact, an echo misplaced in time. Still, I stayed silent. Let them build their buzzwords. Let them believe progress meant deleting what came before. Systems have their own memory. Arrogance usually triggers it. Late Thursday afternoon, I overheard Evan telling Miles, "We found this old cluster labeled Legacy Aegis. Probably junk. I'll wipe it before the weekend." I froze mid-sip, the bitterness of coffee suddenly metallic. That junk directory wasn't old code, it was a decoy shell, a sacrificial layer protecting Aegis Core's integrity. Deleting it wouldn't erase the system, it would awaken it. I didn't stop him. I didn't warn anyone. Within minutes, the monitors flickered once, then returned to normal. No one noticed. Miles was still talking about scalability metrics. The interns were still clapping at buzzwords they didn't understand. But deep inside the network, the first pulse had already gone out. Silent containment mode active. And I just sat there, facing the coffee machine, watching the steam rise like smoke from the fuse they had lit themselves. They called it the Reforge Project, a grand unveiling of Orion's next-generation architecture. The auditorium lights dimmed just enough to make everything look visionary. Rows of folding chairs filled the floor, and a giant screen glowed with buzzwords stacked on gradients of blue efficiency, innovation, future. I took a seat near the back, a quiet figure in a gray suit that suddenly felt older than the company itself. On stage stood Evan Rowe and Clara Dawson, both radiating the kind of optimism that comes from never having cleaned up a crash log at 2 a.m. Clara, my former mentee, spoke with practiced confidence. "We're redefining the backbone of Orion's system infrastructure," she said, as if she'd built the bones herself. I remembered when she couldn't tell the difference between a permission error and a hardware loop. When I'd stayed late rewriting her broken code so she wouldn't lose her job. The applause washed over her now, bright and hollow, as Evan fumbled through a slide of half-borrowed logic. He misused a technical term so badly that I instinctively raised my hand. "Actually, that function isn't." Clara's voice cut through the microphone, smooth and sharp. "Let's give the floor to our current engineers, please." For a moment, the sound didn't register. Then came the small, Brittle laughter first from the front row, then from the edges of the room. The kind that doesn't mock loudly, just enough to sting. I lowered my hand, nodded once, and sat back. No one met my eyes. No one ever does when humiliation is happening in real time, from the last row. I could see a young intern near the exit, phone in hand, trying to look invisible. The faint red light of a recording lens blinked once. I didn't stop him. By the next afternoon, the clip had circulated through Orion's internal chat. "Did you see what happened to Reese?" someone whispered near the elevators. They shut him down mid-meeting. The story spread faster than code corruption, each retelling shorter, sharper, cleaner, but no one said a word to me, not a message, not even a glance. I sat alone in the break room, the hum of the coffee machine louder than memory. My hand trembled slightly as I lifted the cup, but the coffee steadied it. I watched the surface ripple, faint and dark, before taking a slow sip. The taste was burnt, bitter, perfect. Humiliation fades fast in the right temperature. It turns into focus. I looked toward the conference wing, the same place where Aegis once saved their contracts, and let a smile ghost across my lips. They just unplugged their spine. I whispered, outside the window. The factory lights flickered once, inside the servers. Aegis Core was already listening. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the old laptop I hadn't used in years. Its hinge creaked when I opened it, the screen glowing dim blue across the room. The desktop was nearly bare, just one encrypted folder marked Aegis Core Console. I typed the access string by memory. The familiar grid of data bloomed onto the screen, and the quiet calm in my chest turned razor sharp. Lines of activity streamed past in green, unauthorized access attempts. All of them came from one account, C. Dawson, Clara. I stared at the initials for a long time, not angry, just calculating. She wasn't smart enough to reach that deep into the system on her own. Someone was pushing her, someone confident that I'd stay silent. I moved the cursor, opened the side menu, and clicked Activate Watch Mode. The system responded instantly. Monitoring initiated. All unauthorized actions will be recorded. Aegis had always obeyed me with perfect precision. For a moment, the glow on the screen blurred into a memory Clara years ago. Sitting across my desk, hands shaking over a corrupted data log. She'd almost cost Orion a defense contract. I'd stayed up all night rewriting her code. Told her quietly, everyone deserves a second chance. She'd cried from relief back then. I suppose that was the last honest moment between us. Now her new version of gratitude was hacking the system she'd once begged me to fix. I leaned closer, scanning the trails. Clara wasn't working alone. Embedded in her sequence was a higher-level authorization string. At first, it looked like a normal internal token, but the signature hash froze me mid-breath. Hendricks, Miles himself, had approved a transfer order. The file name said it plainly, Contract 74B Ownership Transition Agreement, Aegis Core System External Licensing. He was selling it. Selling the architecture that kept our defense manufacturing synchronized. The same system the Department of Defense once called non-replicable strategic software. I scrolled further. The destination wasn't another facility. It was a private defense contractor based out of Virginia, one of Orion's silent competitors. Miles had been setting this up for months, using Clara as the inside hand. A small laugh escaped me, low and hollow. He wanted to sell a heartbeat. How patriotic. I minimized the log, set a shadow trace to record everything Clara touched, and encrypted the evidence into 3 off-site backups. My pulse slowed as the plan took shape, clean, precise, inevitable. They thought I'd walk away quietly, but Aegis Core still listened to my voice, not theirs. By morning, the plan was already alive, quiet, precise, surgical. I hadn't destroyed anything. Destruction was for amateurs. What I set in motion was protection. Aegis Core had always been built to defend itself, not to attack. All I did was whisper a command, a line of code that told it to breathe differently to slow the rhythm of Orion's production heartbeat until someone finally noticed what kept it beating. Inside the main facility. The first glitch arrived like a yawn. Conveyor units in the defense assembly hall paused for exactly 3 seconds, then resumed as if nothing had happened. Operators frowned, checked control panels, shrugged. No alarms, no failures, just hesitation. Minutes later. Another delay, 7 seconds this time, barely enough to trigger a support ticket, then 11. Patterns that didn't look like patterns until they did. From my apartment window, I watched the factory's external feed flicker through my monitor. Workers leaned over terminals, gesturing in confusion. The red clock lights on the floor counters blinked out of sync for the first time in years. It wasn't chaos. It was symmetry-breaking, deliberate, elegant at Orion's executive floor. Miles Hendricks sat at his polished walnut desk, mid-call with the defense liaison when the indicator panel beside his monitor began flashing amber. The system only used amber for one message operation latency beyond threshold. Miles cut the call short, jaw tightening. "Who authorized this delay?" he barked. No one answered immediately. He turned toward Evan Rowe, who was already pretending to type diagnostics. "Sir, maybe a temporary process, find it." Miles snapped. "Now." In the production control room, a team of young engineers scrambled to isolate the anomaly. Code windows stacked across their screens, running traces that danced like smoke. One of them, a thin kid named Felix Tran, spotted it first. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Sir, there's a name on the access log." Miles leaned over his shoulder, whose Felix hesitated, swallowed, and said, "L. Reese." The silence that followed was almost cinematic. Miles straightened, his expression hardening into that corporate calm that hides panic. "You're telling me the man I fired is inside my system?" Felix nodded, eyes wide. "At least, his credentials are—" Miles's fist hit the desk. "Lock him out, lock everything out." They could try. Of course, but Aegis didn't answer to them. Every firewall they threw up only triggered deeper failsafes. The more they chased, the slower the system became. I sat in my apartment, sipping black coffee, watching as new error logs rolled in one after another. Latency, delay, desync. It was working, every pulse measured, every pause intentional. Cold justice isn't about breaking what they built, it's about reminding them who built it in the first place. The email arrived just after noon, subject line "Notice of Legal Action." It carried the sterile tone only corporate lawyers can perfect. I opened it slowly, already knowing the rhythm of the words before I saw them. Allegations of intentional system disruption, breach of confidentiality, violation of intellectual property protocols. In simpler language, they were calling me a saboteur. For 18 years. I'd kept their infrastructure alive. Now I was the virus. I read the entire message twice, not out of shock but out of habit. The irony was surgical. Miles Hendricks, who had sold half the company's ethics to the highest bidder, was accusing me of breaking trust. I almost admired the symmetry. Almost. A laugh escaped me dry, humorless. I reached into the drawer beside my desk and took out the silver USB drive I'd kept sealed for years. The metal was scratched from age, but the contents were immaculate, the original blueprint of Aegis Core, drawn and signed by me in 2012, long before Orion ever held a defense contract. I opened the file. The signature line glowed faintly on screen. L. Reese. April 14th of 2012. Proof that Aegis had always been mine. Proof they had simply rented the heartbeat I designed. For a moment, anger tightened my chest, sharp and clean. I opened the command terminal, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The line sat there, blinking, waiting for me to finish it. Execute total system lockdown. It would take less than 5 seconds. Aegis would shut every production node, every shipment tracker, every payroll link, turn Orion's empire to static. But my hand stopped halfway through. I don't know why at first. Then I saw it, the unread email buried in my inbox, sent 3 months ago from a junior engineer I barely remembered. Mr. Reese, thanks for building a system that never fails. My team's paychecks rely on it. I stared at the line until the edges of the screen blurred. There were hundreds of people like him, technicians, operators, families behind those paychecks. They hadn't erased me. They were just trying to survive inside a machine that forgot who built it. Slowly, I erased the command. My anger folded in on itself, cooling into precision. Then I attached the blueprint, the server invoices, and the LLC ownership filings to an email addressed to my attorney. I typed a single sentence. They're accusing me of stealing my own creation. An hour later, she called back, voice sharp with disbelief. Landon, they made a fatal error. Their contracts never transferred source code ownership. Legally, you still own everything. For the first time that day. I leaned back and exhaled. They had tried to bury me under paperwork, but all they'd done was hand me the shovel. The boardroom at Orion Defense Systems looked like a battlefield disguised in glass. Every executive was seated, back straight, ties perfect, eyes pretending not to tremble across the main screen. The title read, Investor Review, Graves Defense Capital. It wasn't just any review, this was Judgment Day. Miles Hendricks stood at the head of the table. His smile stretched thin, while Clara Dawson flipped through data charts she barely understood. The video feed connected. On the screen appeared Elias Graves, founder of Graves Defense Capital and the man whose money had kept Orion alive during its worst years. His voice carried calm authority, the kind that didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. "Good morning," he said. "Let's get straight to the point." He glanced at the reports in front of him, then looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. 10 years ago, he began, I had lunch with one of your lead engineers, Landon Reese. The room froze. We sat in a diner off Route 9. He drew something on a napkin while explaining the architecture of a system he called Aegis, said it would keep any defense network from collapsing under its own complexity. Graves reached into his briefcase and unfolded a small piece of fabric, even through the video feed. The camera caught it clearly, the faded blue ink sketch of a circuit map, and beneath it, a signature still visible after all these years, L. Reese, 2013. No one spoke. Miles's jaw locked. Clara stared down at her hands. Graves continued. Voice steady. That drawing predates every version of Aegis listed in Orion's patents. So before I approve another cent of investment, I need to know who actually owns the system running your entire infrastructure. Miles cleared his throat, searching for words. It's a company property. Mr. Graves, internal development, legacy code. Graves' eyebrow lifted. Then why does every trace of it lead back to a private LLC owned by Mr. Reese? Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. You could almost hear the collective realization that the floor had just dropped. Graves leaned forward, calm but lethal. Until ownership is verified, I'm freezing all capital streams. Miles, I suggest you take a leave of absence, effective immediately. Miles didn't move. Clara's hands shook as she shut her laptop. From my apartment miles away, I watched it all through Aegis Corps' passive monitoring stream. The system didn't need to record sound. The silence alone was enough. That silence, the kind that follows truth when it finally lands, was louder than any applause. I sat back in my chair, the faint hum of the server filling the room like a steady heartbeat. On the screen, Graves folded the napkin and placed it back in his briefcase as if sealing a verdict for the first time in months. I smiled, not wide, not proud, just steady. The kind of smile you wear when the world finally catches up to the truth. The sound of justice wasn't thunder. It was quiet, and it was beautiful. The email came 3 weeks after the boardroom collapse. The sender's name barely registered at first. Ava Lynn, CEO of Heliarch Dynamics. The message was short. Without decoration, we're rebuilding something that deserves to last. We'd like you to build its brain, CTO position. Interested, I read it twice, unsure whether to laugh or exhale. For the first time in months, someone wasn't asking what went wrong. They were asking what could be right again. By the following Monday, I was standing in a renovated warehouse on the east side of Boston, sunlight cutting through wide glass panes and landing on a dozen young engineers crowded around whiteboards. The air smelled like solder and coffee, two things that had built most of my career. Ava walked me through their prototype lab, explaining how Heliarch had been quietly developing defense-grade logistics systems with one guiding principle: transparency over showmanship. When she finished, she said, "We don't need something flashy. We need something that works. Can Aegis do that? It can." I said, "But I'll rebuild it from the ground up." They called the new version Aegis One and etched its tagline across the lab wall, built on truth, forged in silence, for the first time in years. The phrase didn't sound ironic. During my first team meeting, someone in the back raised a hesitant hand, a familiar face, slightly older now, but unmistakable. The former intern from Orion. He gave a nervous smile. "Sir," he said, "I was the one who recorded that clip when they cut you off in the presentation." I paused, unsure how to respond. He looked down, then added, "That video made me choose this career. I wanted to build things that last like you did." The room went silent, not out of awkwardness, but respect. I nodded once. "Then let's make sure this one does." The next weeks blurred into sleepless design sessions and whiteboard sketches. The team was green but fearless. They didn't care about titles, or buzzwords, or politics only about how to make a system serve the people behind it. When someone asked the first question that mattered, how do we protect people with it? I felt something shift. Not pride, not nostalgia, something quieter. Purpose. Late one night, as I finalized the first operational build, Ava walked in holding a printout of the day's industry bulletin. "You'll want to see this," she said, smiling. The headline read, "Heliarch Dynamics awarded Strategic Defense Logistics contract formerly held by Orion Defense Systems for a long time." I just stared at it. The circle had closed itself without noise or vengeance. Justice didn't have to roar, it just had to continue working. When the servers hummed to life under the name Aegis One, I stood there listening to its rhythm. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a second chance with cleaner code, steadier hands, and a heart that finally belonged where it should. The morning air was sharp enough to taste. From the rooftop of Heliarch Dynamics, I could see the skyline stretching east toward the water, every building catching the early light like polished steel. Beyond the haze, miles away, stood the faint outline of Orion Defense Systems, once a monument of ambition, now just a name on a flickering sign. Its parking lot looked emptier than I remembered, the company's grand logo sputtering in half-lit neon. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle against the cold wind. They built weapons. I murmured to no one. I built truth. It wasn't bitterness that filled my voice, it was quiet recognition. Orion had always confused power with permanence, but power fades when it's built on the wrong foundation. Truth. Though truth endures. Beside me. My tablet blinked awake with a soft tone. Across the screen scrolled a single message from the new Aegis One system, Aegis Core, legacy mode deactivated, owner verified. I smiled faintly. The transfer was complete. Aegis now lived entirely under Heliarch's network reborn, unshackled, and mine again in every legal and moral sense. Miles Hendricks had resigned 2 weeks earlier. Clara had vanished from the press briefings. Orion still existed on paper, but its pulse had gone still. A breeze swept across the roof, carrying the scent of rain and machine oil. I thought back to every corridor I'd walked at Orion, every late-night soldering code while the world slept, every silence I'd endured so someone else could take the credit. Funny thing about silence, it teaches you how to listen better than applause ever could. My tablet chimed again. A new email slid into view. The sender's name made me pause. Elias Graves. The message contained only one line. History remembers the architect, not the presenter. For a moment, I just stood there, the city moving quietly beneath me. The sunlight had climbed higher, glinting off the rows of solar panels on Heliarch's roof. Each one fed into Aegis One's new control hub, a system born from the same design Orion once tried to sell off. Except now, every line of code carried a cleaner signature, one that belonged wholly to me. I took another sip, feeling the calm settle in layers: vindication, relief, clarity. This wasn't revenge, it was realignment. Justice didn't need to humiliate, it simply needed to correct. I turned toward the stairwell. Leaving the skyline behind, inside, the young team was already at work, monitors glowing, keyboards clacking, laughter echoing against the concrete walls. They didn't treat me like a relic here. To them, I was part of the circuitry, not the past. And that's when I understood something simple but whole. You don't win by tearing down what wronged you. You win by building something better, something that outlives the noise. Orion had chased power. I had chosen precision. Power fades, precision lasts. As I headed downstairs, I looked once more at the screen. The confirmation still glowed quietly. Owner verified. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hums quietly through the wires you built yourself. If this story spoke to something in you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or replaced, remember the quiet ones are often the architects of everything that endures. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe in stories where truth still wins, even in silence, tap like. Share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more. Because sometimes, justice doesn't roar, it resonates.